Liberia was formed by the Americans in the 19th century as a home for returned slaves, and many black Americans made their way across the Atlantic to this new nation. However, although the Americo-Liberians only made up around 5% of the population, they controlled the government and most institutions. So the country became largely segregated, with the Christian Americans holding power along the coast, and the native Africans living in the poorly developed hinterland, and the natives were only granted citizenship in the early 20th century, and even after that, while Charles D.B. King was president, the League of Nations accused Liberia of using the natives as slaves, while building their roads and even exporting some of them. Plus, as the European powers began to invest in their colonies, the Liberian economy was left lagging behind and dependent on foreign loans. However, beginning in the 1920s, rubber companies began to invest in the country, and although this helped the economy, they ended up selling large chunks of land to foreign businesses. And during World War II, many of the locals began to move towards the coast looking for jobs that were created when American troops were stationed in Monrovia. But this only highlighted the income disparity. Then, after the war, as African countries gained their independence, anger against the ruling minority in Liberia began to grow. But with the help of American loans, the Liberian ruling class stayed in power, and the economy improved. Meanwhile, President Tubman and his true Whig party largely ran unopposed, until he died in 1971 and was replaced by William Talbot. Talbot would go on to win the election in 1975, once again running unopposed, but broke from Tubman's pro-American policies, and even established relations with the likes of Gaddafi and Eastern Bloc countries. Plus, unlike his predecessor, he was able to speak a local language, and tried to bring natives into the government. However, he faced backlash from both the Americo-Liberians for challenging their power, and the natives for moving too slowly. Otherwise, in 1975, to end Liberia's one-party system, he did recognise the Progressive Alliance of Liberia. However, there were still many issues in the country, like the price of rubber dropped, leaving the economy stagnated, and in 1977 many government officials were executed for the Maryland killings, when people were killed for ritualistic purposes so they had their body parts removed. And finally, in 1979 there was a proposal to raise the price of rice. So the Progressive Alliance of Liberia called for a demonstration against the government, and around 10,000 people joined in the protests. But it descended into a riot and widespread looting took place. So the army was called in, dozens were killed and hundreds were injured. And in the aftermath, the PAL was banned and its leader, Gabriel Batchus Matthews, was ordered to be arrested on charges of treason. So in April 1980, a master sergeant in Monrovia named Samuel Doe led a small group of soldiers into the presidential palace and killed Talbot. Doe set up the People's Redemption Council, which was dominated by native Liberians, and quickly set about rounding up members of Talbot's cabinet and having them executed. But Doe, as a member of the Kran tribe, began to put people within his own tribe into positions of power, as well as the Mandinka, who many people in Liberia saw as foreigners. So violent clashes began to occur between them and other tribes, notably the Gio and Mano. In fact, one of his fellow coup leaders, Gwiwonkpa, was a Gio, and in 1985 he tried to oust Doe. But shortly after he arrived in Liberia from his exile in Sierra Leone, he was captured, killed, and allegedly eaten. So Doe remained in power thanks to a rigged election in 1985, the murder of political opponents, and financial aid from the US. Plus, he also began to bring many Americo-liberals back into power to help run the government. And he also sacked Charles Taylor from his cabinet in 1983. This was for embezzlement, and Taylor fled to America. However, once in America he was arrested, but managed to escape from prison in 1985 and ultimately escaped the USA. He found his way to Libya, where he was trained in guerrilla warfare under Gaddafi, before making his way to the Ivory Coast. And once there he formed an army of mainly people from within the Gio and Mano tribes who fled the country. This army was known as the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, and he invaded, beginning the First Liberian Civil War in 1989.